Welcome to the Title III and Reg A panel, which is mostly going to be the Reg A panel because most of us don't think much of Title III. But what I'd like to do before I introduce myself and my company is start down with Ryan Granito there from Fundrise and let each of us introduce ourselves and go down the list so that I don't embarrass myself. Ryan, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Gene. My name is Ryan Granito, Vice-President of Real Estate with Fundrise. We are a national capital provider for investors and developers into real estate across the country. We're actually using Regulation A+ with a couple of our e-REIT vehicles that are available for investment into on our website.
So my name is Steve Sadler. I am CEO of Allegiancy. We are a commercial real estate fee-for-service asset manager. We administer assets on behalf of investors, third-party investors, whether it's family offices, private equity funds, or institutional quality individual investor. And we are one of the early filers for a Reg A+ offering. And part of what I'll talk about today is some of the things that we've learned in the last, 90, 120 days of that process.
Hi, Seth Wilson, Executive Director at Cutting Edge Capital. Cutting Edge Capital is a primarily group of securities attorneys. We have really three divisions: Cutting Edge Counsel, that works with a lot of the legal work of corporate docs and filings. Cutting Edge Capital, which really is more of a consultancy role in assisting issuers in preparing their documents for filing. And then we have Cutting Edge X, which is a platform for listing these filings. Most of our filings are state-registered securities, direct public offerings. Everything that's listed on our platform is directed towards non-accredited investors.
Hi, my name's Howard Hill. I'm not on the screen here, but I'm with Folio Capital, or Folio Investing, actually. Folio is the only broker-dealer in the country that provides custodial services and clearing services to the private securities industry. We also work with around 500 or so RIA firms, broker-dealers, and other institutional distribution opportunities. Grateful to be here today. Thank you.
I'm Gene Massey with MediaShares. We are doing two things. We are going to be doing our own Regulation A offering in a few months, but in the meantime, we've been consulting with other companies, introducing them to nice people like Howard and other brokerages where we syndicate a deal and helping people understand how the Regulation A process works and walking them through the whole entire process. But what I'd like to do before we actually start questions with the panel is if we could put up that other slide. I've got a little slide to show you something here. Crowdfunding, I don't want to break your hearts, but it's nothing new. It started in 1606 with that very little square on the left up there with the Dutch East India Company in 1606 decided we're going to get a lot of people to invest in something. And then the New York Stock Exchange, the Buttonwood Agreement in 1792, they said, why don't we get a bunch of people to invest in the stock market? But what changed was the ticker. The telegraph enabled people to communicate that companies were still in business. Very often they were still selling stock on the New York Stock Exchange in companies that had long since gone bankrupt in another part of the country. This is before the telegraph. And then in 1876, the telephone came in and brokers were able to call up people and sell them investments. This was a big deal. Well, what we have now is not crowdfunding, because there was always crowdfunding. What we have now is internet funding is really what we're talking about, and being able to do an offering, a stock offering on the internet. And it's still being done, of course, through brokerages and people calling up their friends and investors on the phone. But primarily, the internet has changed everything, mostly the way you communicate with the shareholder, potential investors. And this is because of the Jobs Act in 2012 and because of Reg D and 506C and Reg A. You can now go out and generally solicit. You can sell to non-accredited investors. And so it's really opened up a whole new world of investing on the internet. And so if that's true, if I can put my offering on the internet, I'd like to start with Steve. Now, last night at dinner, Steve, you talked about some problems that you've had with finding good advertisers, good ad agencies. Please tell me what you think a company needs to do in order to craft their story on a page on the internet so that people can actually get excited about your offering and invest.
Yeah, I think what we came to, I guess belatedly, was a realization that the only part of this that matters is the marketing. I mean, you can sell a really crappy security to people if your marketing is good. So being a great company is, I mean, it's certainly good, feels good to be a good company, but that's not getting your deal done. You ultimately have to build a crowd. I think Fundrise was very successful in no small part because they started with a crowd. They built their own crowd the old-fashioned way. And so if you're looking at crowdfunding and you don't have a crowd or don't have a natural audience, don't have a niche of people that are emotionally invested in your area, your enterprise, your industry, your success, then you're in trouble. And I would tell you to be very careful about proceeding and that to spend your time building that audience. You need to find some hook that will make people care about you and your company before you go out and try to raise capital. What we learned was that hiring the sort of glitzy, sexy ad agencies that all talk a good game is a very expensive way to go about building a crowd because they don't, generally speaking, seem to be all that adept at direct response marketing. They're not particularly good at digital marketing. They may be good at branding. They may make pretty pictures and give you good copy that makes your offering or your company sound appealing. But taking the next step in creating an active response on the part of the recipient of that information, that's something that was shockingly difficult for us to find. We went through 3 or 4 firms before we landed with actually Greg Reiter in the back there at Angel Marketing. Raise your hand, Greg. Greg is who we're working with now, and we've seen, I don't have the numbers, but it's easily a 10-fold improvement in performance of the advertising in terms of converting into actual interested people that will actually have a conversation about the things that we're talking about. So I think the first thing you can do is build your own audience and understand your audience and your message. We spent a lot of time flailing around with expensive advertising that didn't work, and you don't want to do that. That's not a good way to spend money.
Now, Ryan, you had your offering, one of your offerings, oversubscribed, I believe, in a matter of a few hours. Can you tell us how you were so successful? Was that because you had a great ad agency, or did you already have a crowd? How did you do that?
I think we were able to attract a large amount of interest in part due to marketing, but I think execution as well. We've have a track record of picking good assets and sticking to our guns and providing good deals for investors to invest in, and that's really been the largest attraction for us.
So in your offering, the first E-REIT, I thought I read somewhere that like 90, maybe even more % of the investors that went into the E-REIT were people that had been in another Fundrise deal. Right, so that's what I'm talking about, building a crowd. I mean, these guys had done successful investments, had nurtured those clients, and then leveraged that relationship to be very successful in their Reg A plus E-REIT offering. And that's the key piece of that. For Allegiancy, in our case, we're a real estate services company, so we're not selling hard assets. I think that's a difference that you want to pay attention to depending on the nature of your company. If you're raising capital for a physical piece of real estate, whatever it might be, I think that's a little bit different. Maybe it's a little bit easier for people to get their arms around. But at the end of the day, we had really never raised money for the management or the fee-based management company, so we didn't have a good audience like Fundrise had with all of their previously successful investments. Makes it much easier to get those guys interested in your next deal.
Now, Seth, you're a company that does similar to what MediaShares does, and you walk an issuer through the entire process, right? So how would you help an issuer craft their story on the internet?
Marketing is a very key part of that, and that's why a lot of times as we work with developing the offering for the regulator to review and putting together the marketing package that the regulator will review, we're also encouraging and work with a number of marketing firms that the actual issuer will engage directly with to help them, because at the end of the day, for direct public offerings, it's direct from the issuer to the customer, to the investor. And so really that marketing effort really has to come through from the issuer. And it's the type of issuer, the type of market that they're focused. So for example, and we do real estate, but we also do a wider range of other types of crowds. But you know, one real estate offering, for example, has been People's Community Market in Oakland, California. An area that's going through a little bit of redevelopment, gentrification processes, and they realized that they needed a grocery store in that area. So part of the marketing effort is not just, you know, here's a real estate offering. The type of focus has been who's going to visit and really engage in that community with the grocery store, and how will they both be a customer and an investor, and how do we start to expand that out? We also have here today Fulton Street Investors, one of our clients in Fresno, that focuses on redevelopment areas, retail redevelopment in cities like Fresno. Craig also has a restaurant in the area. So you can imagine how in a direct offering, building a marketing strategy about here's a redevelopment in our community, here's a local restaurant, here's a network of relationships that Craig and his businesses have already created. That's a different marketing strategy tailored to the type of investment that he's looking for.
Well, and Howard, in your shop, I mean, you guys are handling securities transactions for a lot of different firms. I know that you are involved in, was it Matchbox, which is a restaurant company up in D.C. They are doing an offering that you guys were involved in, and it's similar in that there's a natural audience of all the people in that market that go to those restaurants become potential clients.
Well, that brings us to a really good question, Howard. Now, if you're doing offerings on the internet, obviously the first component is to drive the traffic to the website or to the platform where the offering is being presented. But then comes the transaction itself, an actual doing a transaction electronically. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So in this new world here, you've heard some interesting things earlier from Nav and from Richard about the creation and the democratization of investing and getting more people, sorry, Gene, getting more people involved, and how do you get people to convert at all types of different income levels or net worth, right? So not just the accredited, but also everyday investor, whether it be through their own funds or through IRAs, and that's really a huge untapped market that I can address a little bit later. But what Folio does is Folio is kind of the Intel inside kind of operation. We're a broker-dealer. We provide clearing and custody services to other broker-dealers as well, but also for direct issuers, for other platforms, et cetera. And what we've done is we're the only broker-dealer in the country right now that's created a process that enables an investor to come to a website, whether it's our hosted website, whether it's your hosted website, a white labeled site, or connected through APIs, however it may be. But we've created a process that enables an investor to actually purchase a security in exactly the same fashion that they're already used to, which is when they open up a brokerage account anywhere else, a bank account, any kind of a financial transaction, there are certain steps that they go through. It's the same process with us as doing that. So it would be the same as if they wanted to go onto the platform, any other platform, for example, Schwab, Fidelity, E-Trade, listed up here, whoever, and they wanted to buy a share of Apple. Everybody knows what that process looks like. We make that process exactly the same for a private security, whether it's a Reg D or CF, Reg A, whatever is irrelevant to us. We just create that same process. So we make the transaction very, very easy for the investor and very easy to manage for the issuer.
Can you also talk about how...
Hang on one second, Gene. One of the things you want to think about is that this back-end fulfillment piece is really a critical component. So if you spend some time studying digital marketing, one of the things that you'll find is that the smallest changes or the smallest impediments to an investor or an interested party can dramatically impact the response rates. And so you change the image or you change the copy and all of a sudden you're getting 5% response rates instead of 2%. Well, all of that doesn't do you a whole hell of a lot of good if they land at your final landing page and click on the I want to invest button, and then that system is clunky and you start losing them. And certainly we experienced some of that with guys that were running the back end for us was Fund America, and we had dropout rates that were just astronomical. And it was largely because that platform was not well developed. And so if you didn't have an investor who was deeply passionate about buying that product, like an Elio Motors investor seemed to be, it was awfully easy to discourage them by having a clunky intake engine that ultimately ran them off. And so that last mile is a critical part of it. And I think the Folio platform is a great example of how you want to do that and how to do it right. But if you don't do it right, all the rest of the money is kind of wasted.
And Howard, would you also like to address how IRAs work?
Yeah, first I want to thank Steve for being my best advertiser. And, I'm really going to take him everywhere with me. But
This is being recorded.
yeah, it is being recorded. No, one of the things that I mentioned and that you heard earlier from the fireside chat was that the accessing investors and the ability to access retirement money or qualified money is a very clunky process. If anybody in this room has ever tried to raise capital from that, it's difficult because you introduce a number of other parties to try and get that money into or get it qualified to invest in that type of an investment. And it's expensive as well, because many of the operations that enable that, the trust companies out there will charge $1,000 a year, or sometimes more, sometimes a little less, but for the most part, somewhere in there to qualify that money to be invested in as a self-directed IRA, as they call it. On the Folio platform, because we treat every security the same, and it just becomes a security on our security master, and we're holding everything in street name, when we open accounts, we don't care if it's an individual account, an IRA account, a joint account, a SEP, whatever, it's all the same to us. It's just one account type that we place on our platform so that investor can go through and invest their IRA money, transfer their IRA from wherever else they hold it, a bank, a broker-dealer, other broker-dealer, through a process called an ACAT. Very, very simple process, but they can transfer that IRA money directly to us, invest in your security that fast with no additional fees. And that's a big deal, to especially people when they're investing smaller amounts. If you do a $10,000 investment to something under a Reg A or even a CF, having to pay a $1,000 charge in fees to set up a self-directed IRA kind of defeats the purpose. And so going through us, you don't have that expense.
Now, Seth, at the risk of saying some dirty words here, Reg CF and Title III, we were talking earlier about the state offerings versus Title III and how a state offering or Title III might serve a community in a local area. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we think about crowdfunding, we think it's pretty new, and I like your history lesson over here. In fact, if you go back to the Statue of Liberty, the pedestal, was actually a crowdfunded initiative by the owner of the newspaper in New York City to fund that throughout the community. So, community investing has been around for quite some time. The blue sky laws that came around in the early 1900s that every state has and falls under that 504 regulation, where if all of your investors are in a particular state, if the business
Or even a city.
For state securities, if it's in a state, if all of the investors in the state, the business is registered in that state, and the business activity revenues are generated in that state, then SEC really, you're exempt from the SEC regulations. So when you start to look at community and city development, how many folks are really committed to seeing certain types of developments in their communities that somebody across the other end of the country may not have the same affinity for your community as you do? And so how you structure that security, the affinity that you're trying, the market that you're trying to reach, we believe that direct state-registered securities can cover a lot of things that we're trying to fit into a box of Title III or Title II, when in fact state-registered securities could do just as well. And to that point, we've set up our website because you're working with state-registered securities. You want to make sure that the issuer is going to be in compliance with both federal and state laws. And so if the state puts in suitability standards around who can invest or what have you, we basically have our website, which is a listing of tombstone companies, like you would see on a Wall Street journal. You'd click on that tombstone of information, and then the tools go directly to the issuer's website. So you get more information directly about the issuer. You're communicating directly with the issuer. And then we provide a set of qualifying tools that the issuer can use from that listing to be able to qualify and get the investment right there on the spot.
Now, Steve, if I put my offering on a website, does that mean that I can't talk to brokers, or are they going to be mad at me because my offering's on a website? Or I know you're working with a brokerage. Do you want to talk about how an offering can still be syndicated even though you've got it on your website?
We decided early on that our service-based company, since we're not a direct real estate asset company, but a service-based company, that we wanted to involve the broker-dealer network in the capital raise. Our view was that it's primarily a financial investment, not a passion play, and Allegiancy would benefit from tapping into the existing relationships that broker-dealers, RIAs, investment advisors have. And so we signed on with W.R. Hambrecht as our lead investment banker, and they're supposed to take us out to the broker-dealer community. Well, separately, we have done probably $300 million worth of Reg D private placements in the past, so we understand something about how that business works. And so as we went out to the broker-dealer network, we had that sort of dual track, crowdfunding on the one hand, broker-dealer network on the other hand, expecting the BDs to deliver, 2/3 of the money. As it turns out, that was incredibly optimistic. What we found in our conversations in the first 90 to 120 days with the various broker-dealers is a shocking level of ignorance and lack of awareness of crowdfunding, Regulation A, Title II, Title III, Title IV. Very much a project of education that is still happening now. We found great enthusiasm on the equity sales desk. So the guys who sell securities and are looking for opportunities to make money, those guys were pretty excited about the Allegiancy offering, but then they have to get it approved through their compliance department. And in a FINRA broker-dealer, that apparently, those guys are actually in charge now. The compliance department is. And so what ends up happening in our case was they looked at it and they said, hey, Reg A Plus is too new. We don't know how FINRA is going to treat it. and they said that the fact that you guys are looking to be OTC traded in the aftermarket is problematic because FINRA told us they don't like OTC stocks. And so we love what you're doing. We think it's going to be great for America to rejuvenate the capital markets, and we're going to kind of wait and see how it goes.
Okay,
And
now-
so we ended up with, of the 20 broker-dealers that were in had signed selling agreements, we ended up with 2 that were actively ready to play ball with us. And so very challenging. And for even for us with some experience, it was a big surprise that there was that much what I like to call
got a question.
collective corporate cowardice.
Now, Howard, if you function as the back end on my website, and you are going to be doing the transactions, which means you'll be doing the electronic signatures, the delivery of disclosure documents, accredited investor verification, ACH checking account debit, you'll be doing all of that. And yet you have, as I understand it, 100,000 investors that on your thing. I mean, do I have access to those investors?
Yeah, you know, we perform all those functions, and yes, we do have a great retail network that comprises of, like, you know, about 100,000 investors and all those other RI firms. But to Steve's point, and you know, to what Ryan's doing over there, the importance to success of having your own distribution or bringing your own crowd is paramount. Every single issuer platform that we work with or we talk to, in some form or fashion in the conversation will ask us about our distribution. And we'll be very frank with them, tell them what we have, and the next comment will be, don't count on us. And a lot of that has to do with what you're hearing from Steve and that experience, is that the broker-dealer network out there is very shy about this at current time because of the regulatory environment. And unfortunately, we do operate in one of the most highly regulated environments in the country, and there's a general you know, feeling of nastiness towards our business, you know, and it's perpetuated every day in the press and the media. You'll hear things about, you know, Wall Street, blah, 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 and this and that, but they don't give us credit for what we actually do, which is, you know, raise capital and help businesses grow around the country, which creates jobs, et cetera. So what I will tell people is we have great distribution, and we're in the process right now of educating that distribution. And the good news is that, you know, Steve, you know, shares a great experience, but
It was a terrible experience.
well, it's a great experience, and you got to know what it is, right? It is what it is. But you know, we've talked about this. It is changing gradually.
And that's what Richard was saying, right? This is like a 10-year process, and so I think we all have to try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different ways to approach it, right? You
Right.
don't have to just do A+ nationwide. You can be more targeted.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's a great point, is really targeting towards what your audience is and using, you know, those resources available to do that helps immensely, because we're going to get all those other broker-dealers up and running at some point, and they're talking to us. Every day we have conversations with different broker-dealers about using our platform because they gain access to a simple process, which has kind of been the headache for a lot of the compliance departments. A lot of the compliance departments at most of these big broker-dealers don't want to hold paper. And right now, if you issue any kind of paper or work with any kind of transfer agent, they see it as it's difficult for them to deal with. It's just an extra step in their compliance area, and they don't want to do it because they want to make their job simpler. So they're looking for less friction, ways to make it easier. The RIAs, on the other hand, are a little bit different as well, in that, you know, they serve a fiduciary responsibility. They have responsibility to manage that money for their clients, and they control, you know, $1 trillion or more, and there's a lot of money available. They're sitting on a lot of cash. They like these, but they want somebody to do the due diligence for them. And so the more information that's provided to them, the easier it is for them to get involved. And if you have access in your local markets or in wherever you're looking at to work with an RIA and get them involved early on, I highly encourage you to do it.
Now, I got a very difficult question for Ryan. Ryan, Regulation A plus was designed for non-accredited investors, basically, so you could access that market. I have an investor in Oklahoma who sold his business And the guy was very unhappy at one point, and my investor was working late one night, and the bullets came through the window. One hit him in the leg, and one hit him in the arm.
Is this a true story?
This is a true story. And so my question is, if you've got uneducated, non-accredited investors that put money in a deal and they know very little about it, have you had any experience with people being unhappy and not understanding, or is everybody fully understanding? Are the disclosure documents being read well enough? I mean, do you feel that accessing this non-accredited investor market is scary or anything?
I think Gene's threatening you, Ryan.
Yeah. So I'll answer it the best I can because I don't have direct communication with a lot of the investors. But what we've done, and we've done it a couple different ways. We've done Regulation A in the initial offering a few years ago, and then we were doing Regulation D just recently. And what we've found is Regulation A Plus is kind of a double-edged sword. One, it allows you to access a greater population, and what it allows you to do, if you execute well and build a base like we're all talking about, is to grow rapidly and continue to grow. Theoretically, if anybody in the country or anywhere else that the regulation applies to can invest, I mean, that's a pretty big pool of investors. So what we found is, through the years, the investors that when we were doing different types of offerings were chasing yield, and they weren't necessarily, not all the investors were as taking risk into consideration as far as the risk-adjusted return was. And so we found that in order to, the Regulation A offering allows us to diversify through a blind pool, which is also helpful as well. So, but what that does for us is we have to make sure we have to be prudent for our investors and make sure that we're doing the right deals. And so it's a blessing and a curse.
So
Yeah, the
Steve,
best way to
Steve,
I
you had
just want to say a little bit here as well. Our definition of accredited investors and their level of sophistication, there have been proposals about raising that bar from the 200,000 and the 1 million. Imagine if that went up to 750,000 and 5 million. How many folks drop out of that accred pool, and yet one day they're considered sophisticated, the next day they're not. At the same time, we're looking at an incredible rise in what we call the mass affluent market. So that might not necessarily be accredited investors, but still have a lot of potential
knowledge about the market.
Knowledge about the markets, and have potential for investments. And again, that's one of the exciting things. When you look at guys like Craig Charton in Fresno, and the project that he has, where he can take non-accred. They may not be that sophisticated from a chasing yield, but they're chasing their community. And so, imagine, for example, and it's quite possible where you have a community of pensions funds that are focused on jobs in their area. And they're not necessarily looking for that return as much as, if I can put people to work, what is my trade-off of putting X amount of dollars into this type of project? We actually start to move away from the single bottom line of chasing yield to chasing impact. And that's where we see a lot of excitement, and why we think having that direct connection with the investor is very important.
I'd like to open up the panel to questions from the audience now. We've got a microphone coming up here, so if you would raise your hand. There's one back there from Angel Agency. You need to turn it on. There you go.
Two.
There we go.
My name is Greg Ryder. I'm the CEO of Angel Investors Network, and we have a division called Angel Marketing. And my question is, in my relationship with Steve, is there anybody up there that has a successful crowdfunding campaign that didn't actually talk to the investor who invested? Right? So I can see where, hey, if I make an investment of $1,500, I can go online, I can click a button, I can do this. And, yeah, but
I'd like to answer that. That's a very good question.
Yeah, because I still think there's still that human interaction that.
There is in some cases, but I heard a story from Jillian Hellman, the CEO of Realty Mogul once. I believe this is Jillian's story. She said that she opened up her bank account one day and there was $1 million in there from somebody. And she actually called up the investor and said, I got your $1 million, I want to thank you. And she asked him why he invested. He said, well, I invested online because I didn't want to have these kind of conversations. And so sometimes people will actually invest online, never having met a person, never knowing the company, never touring the facilities or anything. They see a deal and they like it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that a little bit in that, maybe not today, but going forward, it'll happen. One of the things, just real quickly about us, Folio, we're a fintech. One of the things we also do is we create robo-platforms for other distributors. And as part of some of the allocations that we're starting to see from some of the people that we're running robo-platforms for, they're saying, can you set up a fund of alternative investment assets? And those alternative investment assets that show up on your platform as a class, because we can do fractional investing, can we invest $10,000 across 15 of them, for example? And we can do that, and that gives them great diversity, it gives the investor great diversity, and they can go online and do it all without ever talking to a human. So it's coming. Is it all there today? But it's coming real fast.
Next question, right here.
Gene, I think you touched on the liability issue of taking on unaccrediteds. I don't think we got there on the panel, but I'm curious to those of you who do have Reg A offerings either in place or coming up. I think Ryan, Steve, and Gene, can you just speak to how you're dealing with that?
Well, Ryan, that's a good question for you.
Yeah, so we have, part of my job is to find the real estate and the deals to invest into. So, we have the experience and background to identify what is a good deal and what isn't a good deal, and there's a lot of qualitative and quantitative analysis in that. So what we need to do is find, align ourselves with good sponsors and developers and investors in order to enable us to find a good deal. I guess it just goes down to execution. We're doing our responsibility to be prudent to our investors and finding the right deals and making sure that their money is safe with us.
Steve, are you worried at all about the legalities?
No, I mean, no. Short answer, we're not worried about it. I mean, on the Reg A side, as you're dealing with non-accredited investors, I mean, good Lord, we spend $100,000 or more with attorneys that are supposed to protect us. So all the disclosures are there. Our experience in the last decade managing invested capital for investors and doing the investor relations with them over years and years and years, our experience has been that if you talk to the people frequently, you tell them the truth when you talk to them, and you answer their questions when they call you, you have almost zero exposure to litigation issues, because most people do understand that investment entails risks. What they hate is when you treat them like dirt, and then they'll sue you just because they're pissed.
Or if you mislead them.
So, I mean, we don't worry about it much. Disclosure is certainly important part of that equation. Having conversations, being available, giving people as much information as they can stomach. But as we've talked about on this panel and maybe the one before, a lot of the people don't really want to talk to you. So you give them access to the information and they're making their own decisions.
Yeah, anybody else? Oh, we got one here. Go ahead.
Hi, John Muller with Truex Development in Temecula, California. We're in a relatively small community, and our CEO, Bernie Truex, has spent 25 years building a reputation in the area that definitely protects. And it's not only in the community, but it's also with the local politicians, city, county, state level. And the non-accredited investors, frankly, scare the hell out of us. Litigation aside, social media today, you bring in 400 or 500 non-accrediteds, you only need 1 or 2 or 3 to get out there on social media and potentially hurting that reputation. So we had looked at Reg A+, we looked at California registration by permit, we wound up going 506C. because we really want to stay away from those folks. So do you have any stories about a situation like that, short of litigation?
Well, I'm not sure you protect yourself a whole hell of a lot by from a social media attack. I mean, a 506c accredited investor who gets angry can do the same thing to you. So, I mean, Ryan is, I think, absolutely right. Your best exemption is the good deal exemption. If nobody loses money, then what do they have to complain about? But ultimately, I think the risk you're talking about is one we all pay attention to, because you can see it, you know, a local restaurant, somebody comes in and has a bad experience and they spend the next 3 weeks flaming them on social media. So from my perspective, that the risk is diminished if you're using accredited investors only to the extent that you have a smaller number of investors. You still have the same risk.
Still have the same potential risk, right?
I think that's
But
right.
it's still a smaller risk.
Yeah, it's a smaller number, and in theory, you know, the accredited investors are sophisticated. I would argue that that's really not necessarily true. We certainly interface with a lot of accredited investors who don't qualify as, you know, very sophisticated.
The risk is there no matter what, whether it's a small number or a large number of investors. It's irrelevant. What you have to have is good protection from your legal representation and a broker-dealer in the mix to help you mitigate much of that risk. But you know, here's the reality of it, is that on social media, you don't have to be an investor to ruin your reputation. They can just not like you. They can have some personal grudge, or you stepped on their land, or whatever it was, and they can come after you and ruin a reputation that way. So that part of it you really can't worry about. And as far as the number of investors that you have, if you have a small pool of investors and they're all accredited, and you have a great deal, and maybe just one of them gets ticked off for some reason, they have a lot of pull, because they can go to the small band and band them together much easier than in a large crowd.
That's right.
Okay, a large crowd, you may have some unsophisticated investors who get ticked off, but they may have small investments. For them to go out and rally 10,000 other investors ain't going to happen.
Anybody
Yeah,
else?
certainly with non-accred, the challenges are, you could have too large of a crowd and you're having to send out the statements and the reporting and the upkeep and maintenance of that for the level of investment can certainly be a challenge.
Not for us. We take care of that part for you.
Right. Well, just in general for the company, that because in many cases the investor may also have to find the valuation from time to time on their investments. That at the same time, by having a larger crowd, you're able to diversify your investor base, which we think investors invest for a lot of different reasons, and the reasons that you're able to diversify can also improve the cost of capital, the cost of risk that you put into that investment offering.
You got one more over here?
Craig Sharton, Fulton Street Investors, a client that Seth was referencing. But I want to ask Ryan a question. Been following you guys for a long time. Do you see any nexus between some community benefit in a project and your ability to raise funds for that project?
We started out back in 2012, I believe, with 3 Regulation A offerings, and we were state specific. And the idea was to make a difference in your community. And so we took that and platform and ran with it, and we found pretty quickly that it doesn't really matter. It does. It does matter. The community wants to participate, but most of the investors that we were attracting from the accredited world were coming from New York, LA, pretty down the middle of the road, Washington, D.C., where we're based. So I think there is obviously a community element, and we try to take a national approach where community specific and target communities where we know well. And one of which is Southern California. I'm home based here in Southern California because it is a complex market. LA has a lot of moving parts. So we operate in markets that we're familiar with and want to give back. And I think that there's not necessarily a a strong correlation with the investors in their neighborhood, but I can't say that it's not there. It is there. But
There's so much opportunity here. I think the critical piece, we remain very excited about the crowdfunding opportunity. We're very excited about Regulation A+. We are deeply involved in Reg D 506C offerings. I think the opportunity for sponsors and real estate investors the future's brighter than it probably has been in years. Whether you decide to do a Reg A Title, was it Title II? What is that? I always forget that. Tier 2, thank you. So Tier 2, $30 million, and you're going to go out into the world, or you decide to do a Tier 1 for a more localized audience. I mean, it's a great tool that you didn't have before. And so my caution to anybody who's listening would be, think this stuff through very carefully. I would encourage you to seek out people that have been down parts of this road before, and not just lawyers and ad agencies and consultants, because with all due respect, all those guys make money whether you win or lose. They all get paid, in most cases, up front, and if your deal goes, they're happy. If your deal dies, they still got paid. And so you want to think about that, and it doesn't mean that their advice is bad. It just means that they don't have a whole lot of skin in the game. And so as you're out there talking to folks, talk to people who have been in the arena and have been bloodied a bit, because there's some insight there. But the excitement that we got when we finally got the messaging right, the excitement that we've received from individual investors for our offering through the internet, people that we did not know and had never seen before, is really cool. I mean, we have people that are responding to the marketing funnels that Greg Reiter at Angel Marketing built, and they're coming to us and they're saying, yep, we want to put $100,000 in, we want to put $50,000 in, we want to put $75,000 in. We had one guy who wanted to do $300,000. So there are real people with real dollars to invest, and your challenge is to figure out how to find them in a way that's cost effective, because the reason we went to the Reg A Plus was we thought we could raise capital more cost effectively than under a Reg D 506C or 506B. We thought we could trim some of our commissions, trim some of the friction in the transaction. I think at this moment in time, that's not true. That Reg A Plus is, unless you have a great audience already built, Reg A Plus is going to be at least as expensive as a private placement was. A year from now, 5 years from now, I'm absolutely certain that A Plus is going to be better. But today, you just don't have that infrastructure, and you're in pioneer mode. And pioneers, they get beat up, and that's just part of the program. And it's okay. They're making it easier for the next guys. So, but don't approach it. I would say don't be as optimistic as we were. Be a little bit more pessimistic or a little bit more skeptical, and spend some time on the front end making sure that you really understand who you want to talk to, who your audience is, and what that emotional hook is, because those are the key pieces, I think.
And on that wise advice, I think we need to close, because we're about 5 minutes over anyway, and I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thanks.